The rain falls on Tokyo in thick, grey sheets, October 1941. It drums against the tile roofs of the Meguro district, a monotonous rhythm that masks other, more furtive sounds. Inside a modest European-style house, the air is thick with cigarette smoke and dread. 3 men wait. One of them, a man with a strong, lined face and intense eyes behind round spectacles, pours a final glass of vodka. His name is Richard Sorge. He is a loyal Nazi, a decorated veteran of the Great War, and the trusted confidant of the German ambassador. He is also a master spy, working for Joseph Stalin. He knows the police are coming. For weeks, the net has been tightening. The cryptic warnings from his wireless operator, Max Clausen, had grown increasingly desperate. The music has stopped. Now, there is only silence. He has burned nothing. Perhaps he believes his diplomatic connections will protect him. Or perhaps, after 9 years of the most dangerous double life imaginable, he simply knows the game is over. He hears the heavy tread of boots on the gravel path, the sharp command in Japanese. The front door shudders under a series of blows. Sorge drains his glass, places it carefully on the table, and turns to face the door as it splinters inward. In that moment, he holds in his head the greatest secret of the coming World War. Germany will soon invade the Soviet Union, and Japan will not attack from the east. Stalin's fate rests on this information, and it is trapped in this room, with him. Our story begins not in the Orient, but in the smoky cafes and turbulent politics of post-Great War Europe. Richard Sorge was a man forged from contradiction. Born in Baku in 1895 to a German father and Russian mother, his very blood was a battleground of empires. He fought for Germany in the trenches, a searing experience that left him with a permanent limp and a radicalized mind. Shrapnel tore his body. The horror tore his faith in nationalism. He found a new faith in communism, a universal creed that promised to transcend the borders that had led to such slaughter. He was recruited by Soviet military intelligence, the GRU. His controllers saw his unique potential, a sharp intellect, a natural charisma, a veteran's courage, and a chameleon's ability to blend. He could be a boisterous, hard-drinking comrade one moment, a meticulous academic the next. He was sent to Shanghai in the early 1930s, a chaotic port city teeming with spies. Here, he cut his teeth in the Shadow War and formed a crucial partnership with a man named Hotsumi Ozaki. Ozaki was no street-level informant. He was a brilliant Japanese journalist, a China scholar with deep connections to the highest levels of Tokyo's political elite. He was also a committed Marxist. In Ozaki, Sorge found his golden source, a man who could penetrate the innermost sanctums of the enemy state. Together, they built the foundation of what would become the Sorge Ring. In 1933, as the Nazis seized power in Berlin, Sorge's controllers gave him his most audacious mission: infiltrate the heart of the German embassy in Tokyo. His cover was impeccable. He arrived as a respected journalist for the Frankfurter Zeitung, a fervent Nazi intellectual with impeccable party credentials. He played the part with gusto. He joined the Nazi Party, charmed the embassy staff with his war stories, and his bottomless capacity for alcohol, and slowly, carefully, wove himself into the fabric of their trust. The key to his success was the German ambassador, Lieutenant General Eugen OTT. OTT, a career military man, was isolated in the complex world of Japanese politics. Sorge presented himself as the perfect solution, a sophisticated, well-connected intellectual who could explain Japan to him. He became OTT's indispensable advisor, a constant presence in the ambassador's office and home. He drafted reports to Berlin. He had unrestricted access to cables, war plans, and the ambassador's own unguarded thoughts. All of it was copied, photographed, and fed to Moscow. Sorge's life in Tokyo was a masterpiece of controlled duality. By day, he was the gruff, loyal German, holding court at the Fackel Tavern, a haunt for the Foreign Press Corps and Nazi officials. The air was thick with the smell of beer, cured sausage, and political gossip. He held his liquor like a hero, his loud laughter masking a mind that recorded every slurred confidence. By night, in safe houses smelling of developing fluid and nervous sweat, he composed his reports. His network grew. Branko Vukelic, a Yugoslav journalist who provided photographic expertise. Max Clausen, a burly, no-nonsense radio operator who built his own transmitter from scratch. And, at the pinnacle, Hotsumi Ozaki. Ozaki worked his magic in the rarefied air of the Japanese establishment. He was a member of the Breakfast Group, an informal cabinet of advisors to Prime Minister Konoye. In serene tea rooms and private clubs, where the scent of tatami mats and ink mingled, Ozaki listened as the fate of Asia was decided. He learned of the army's ambitions, the navy's reservations, the delicate balance of power. He passed it all to Sorge, who synthesized it with the German intelligence. The result was a panoramic view of Axis strategy no other Soviet agent, perhaps no other intelligence service in the world, could match. The first great test came in 1939. The Soviet Union and Japan were locked in a bloody border conflict at Nomonhan. Stalin feared a full-scale war on two fronts. Sorge, through Ozaki's contacts in the Japanese cabinet, provided a stream of intelligence revealing Tokyo's intention to seek a diplomatic settlement. The Red Army, emboldened by this certainty, could throw its full force against the Japanese, leading to a decisive Soviet victory. For the first time, Sorge had directly altered the course of a major military campaign. Moscow took note. The man in Tokyo was not just a spy, he was a strategic asset of incalculable value. But the shadows were lengthening. The Japanese secret police, the Toko, were not asleep. They knew there was a sophisticated radio transmitter operating in the city. They began a patient, methodical hunt, using radio direction finding vans that crawled through the streets, listening for the telltale pulse of clandestine messages. Clausen could feel the pressure, the eerie sense that the airwaves were no longer safe. Sorge, emboldened by his diplomatic immunity and his crucial role, grew reckless. He took more risks, met with his agents in public places, convinced of his own invincibility. And then, in the spring of 1941, the whispers from Berlin grew ominous. Ambassador OTT, increasingly viewing Sorge as a brother-in-arms, shared his deepest fears. Hitler was turning east. Operation Barbarossa was in the works. Sorge's messages to Moscow became frantic. He sent warning after warning, detailing the German troop buildup, the precise date of the invasion, June 22nd. Stalin, paranoid and trusting no one, especially not a spy who seemed too good to be true, dismissed the reports as disinformation. He branded Sorge a provocateur. The GRU, Sorge's lifeline, went silent. On June 22, 1941, 3 million German soldiers poured across the Soviet border. The warning had been exact. It had been ignored. The Soviet Union was caught in a catastrophic surprise, losing millions of men within weeks. In Tokyo, Sorge was devastated. His life's work had been rendered null by his master's disbelief. But a new, even more critical question now arose. Would Japan, Germany's ally, honor the Tripartite Pact and strike Siberia, opening a second front that would strangle the Soviet Union? The answer would decide the war. Stalin, reeling from the German onslaught, was forced to listen. He desperately needed to know if he could strip his Siberian divisions, hardened veterans trained for winter warfare, from the Far Eastern Front and throw them into the defense of Moscow. The fate of the Soviet capital, and perhaps the entire nation, hinged on the next message from the spy in Tokyo. Sorge and Ozaki went into overdrive. Ozaki, using all his charm and influence, probed his high-level contacts. The discussions in the breakfast group were tense, divided. The army favored attacking the USSR. The Navy, obsessed with the oil-rich colonies of Southeast Asia, argued for a strike south against the Americans and British. Sorge met Ambassador OTT almost daily, piecing together the German pressure on Japan to join the fight against the Soviets. The tension in the embassy was palpable, a mix of cigar smoke and strategic anxiety. Week by week, the picture clarified. Japan's eyes were turning south. The target would be Pearl Harbor, not Vladivostok. In late September 1941, Sorge sent the most important transmission of his life. The message was concise, definitive. The Japanese government has decided not to attack the Soviet Union this year. This time, Stalin believed. He immediately began transferring 18 divisions, 1,000 tanks, and over 1,000 aircraft from Siberia to the Western Front. These fresh, winter-ready troops would form the backbone of the Soviet counteroffensive that December, saving Moscow and breaking the German advance. Sorge had, in a very real sense, saved the Soviet Union. But in saving a nation, he had signed his own death warrant. The Toko's net, patient and invisible, was finally ready to close. The silence from Max Clausen's transmitter was the loudest sound Sorge had ever heard. It was October 1941. The crucial message had been sent. The Siberian divisions were already moving west. His greatest triumph was complete. Yet, in the quiet of his Meguro home, the only reward was a creeping, ice-water certainty. The Toko had been closing in for months, a slow, meticulous process that felt less like a hunt and more like the gradual tightening of a vice. They had identified Clausen's safe house. Under torture, a minor member of the communist underground had broken, whispering names that led to other names. Sorge's legendary confidence now felt like a trap. He believed his status as a German national, as the ambassador's friend, would be a shield. He had even discussed the spy hunt with OTT, over brandy, offering cynical theories while his own heart hammered against his ribs. It was the ultimate performance, but the audience had stopped watching. The police were coming for Hotsumi Ozaki first. They took Ozaki from his office at the Asahi Shimbun on the morning of October 15th. The arrest was quiet, respectful. There were no shouts, no handcuffs in front of his colleagues. The Toko officers bowed, spoke in low tones, and led the scholar away. Ozaki went peacefully, almost with relief. The double life was a tremendous weight. For 9 years, he had carried the secrets of his nation and his ideology in separate chambers of his soul. Now, the wall between them was collapsing. In the interrogation room, under the relentless, psychological pressure of his captors, he began to talk. He did not mention Sorge immediately. He talked of ideology, of his belief in a better world. But the threads, once pulled, would unravel everything. At 5 a.m. on October 18th, the storm reached Sorge's doorstep. The rain masked the sound of the cars, but not the heavy, purposeful footsteps. He was in the middle of typing a report, a final, futile act of routine. The hammering on the door was not a request for entry. It was a declaration. He rose, his leg wound from the grate were giving him a slight, characteristic stagger. He did not reach for a weapon. He simply waited as the door gave way, revealing the grim, rain-slickered figures of the Toko. His arrest was not violent. They bowed. He nodded. In that surreal, formal moment, the greatest espionage operation of the Second World War ended not with a bang, but with a quiet, terrible courtesy. The interrogation of Richard Sorge was a battle of wills fought in small, sterile rooms. The Toko, expecting a cowering criminal, found instead a poised, arrogant intellectual. He admitted nothing. He presented himself as a diplomat, a journalist, a loyal German. He demanded to see Ambassador OTT. 4 weeks, OTT and the German embassy fought for his release, convinced of a terrible Japanese mistake. They provided lawyers, lodged furious protests. The Toko, patiently, began to present their evidence. Photographs of secret meetings, copies of his reports, retrieved from Clausen's home, the damning testimony of Ozaki, who had finally broken down and named his friend and controller. The most devastating blow came from Berlin. The Gestapo, upon hearing of Sorge's arrest and alleged communism, conducted their own investigation. They dug into his past, into his associations in Germany. A cable arrived at the German embassy in Tokyo. It was unequivocal. Richard Sorge was a dedicated communist, a Soviet spy, and a traitor to the Reich. Ambassador OTT, whose career and judgment were now utterly destroyed by his friendship with Sorge, was recalled in disgrace. The shield of German protection vaporized. Sorge was alone. Now, the interrogations changed. The Japanese were no longer trying to discover if he was a spy. They were trying to understand why. They were fascinated by this man who had so completely fooled them. And Sorge, seeing no further reason for denial, began to talk. He spoke for hours, days, weaving a narrative of his own life and work. He was proud, articulate, and chillingly candid. He admitted to everything. He detailed his network, his methods, his sources. He explained his ideology with the calm fervor of a professor. His confession, typed and bound, became a masterpiece of espionage literature, a portrait of a true believer who never once expressed regret. The trial was a closed, secret affair. There were no journalists, no international observers. The world was at war, and the fate of a few spies in Tokyo was a minor footnote. Sorge and Ozaki sat calmly through the proceedings. They had already accepted their fate. On September 29, 1943, the sentence was pronounced, death by hanging. For over a year, they waited in Sugamo prison. They wrote, they read, they contemplated their lives. Ozaki penned poetic, philosophical letters to his family. Sorge wrote endless appeals, not for mercy, but for political recognition, desperate to have Moscow acknowledge his service. Silence was the only reply from the Soviet Union. The dawn of November 7, 1944, was cold and clear. It was the anniversary of the Bolshevik Revolution. For Sorge, the date could not have been more bitterly symbolic. He was led to the gallows. According to the prison chaplain, his final words were, "To the Soviet Union, to the Red Army, to the Communist International." Another account claims he simply said, in German, "Thank you for everything." The trapdoor opened. Hotsumi Ozaki was executed minutes later. Their bodies were buried in unconsecrated ground within the prison walls, their graves unmarked. In the immediate aftermath, the story was buried by the Japanese and ignored by the Soviets. The war thundered toward its conclusion. In Berlin and Moscow, the men who had known Sorge met their own fates. Ambassador OTT survived the war in obscurity, his reputation in tatters. In Moscow, the GRU files on Sorge were sealed, labeled Soversheno Sekretno, top secret. The man who had saved Moscow was officially a non-person, a ghost in the machine of history. Stalin would never, ever acknowledge that his most crucial strategic decision of 1941 had been based on the intelligence of a spy. To do so would admit he had ignored the same spy's warnings about Barbarossa, a mistake that had cost millions of lives. It was a debt that could never be repaid, so it would never be acknowledged. For years, the Sorge incident was a cryptic rumor in intelligence circles, a whispered legend. It wasn't until 1949 that an American journalist, investigating the Japanese wartime archives, began to piece the story together. The publication of his findings sent shockwaves through the West. But still, Moscow was silent. It was only in 1964, a decade after Stalin's death, that the new Soviet leadership, seeking heroes from the Great Patriotic War, finally exhumed the story. Richard Sorge was posthumously named a hero of the Soviet Union. His face appeared on stamps. A biopic was made. He was transformed from an unperson into a propaganda icon. His complicated, treacherous, alcoholic humanity sanded away into the smooth marble of a socialist saint. But the rehabilitation could not answer the haunting questions. Why had Stalin so fatally ignored the Barbarossa warnings? Was it sheer paranoia, or a deeper, more catastrophic failure of his intelligence apparatus? And what of Sorge's own motivations? Was he truly an ideologue, a soldier for the Comintern? Or was he, at his core, an adrenaline addict, a man who thrived on the ultimate deception, for whom the cause was merely a convenient framework for a life of extraordinary risk? The conflicting portraits remain: the loyal communist, the brilliant narcissist, the lonely drunk, the savior of a nation. His legacy is a paradox written in blood and shadow. The intelligence he provided arguably altered the course of the Second World War, yet he died abandoned by the country he served. He lived a life of profound intimacy and absolute loneliness, surrounded by people who never knew him. He navigated the highest corridors of power, only to meet his end on a prison gallows at dawn. The secrets he stole saved Moscow, but the greatest secret of all was Richard Sorge himself, a man who built a legend out of lies, and whose truth remains, even now, just beyond our grasp. The story, however, does not end with the snap of a rope or the posthumous gleam of a medal. It lingers in the cold, unanswered questions, in the files that may still be locked away, and in the unsettling echoes of Sorge's life in our modern world of shadows and deception. Consider the immediate fallout in Tokyo. The exposure of the Sorge ring sent seismic shocks through the Japanese establishment. Prime Minister Hideki Tojo's government was humiliated. The fact that a communist spy had penetrated the innermost circle of the breakfast group, sitting in on discussions of national destiny, was an unforgivable breach. A brutal purge followed. Officials, journalists, and intellectuals with even the faintest hint of leftist leanings were arrested, their careers and lives destroyed. The Toko's power became absolute, casting a pall of suspicion that stifled any dissent for the remainder of the war. For Japan, the Sorge case was not just a spy scandal. It was a trauma that validated a turn towards paranoid, repressive control. In Germany, the scandal was a minor, embarrassing footnote in the cataclysm of the war's end. But for those personally touched, it was a poison. Eugen OTT, the betrayed ambassador, lived out his days in Munich, a broken man. He was never able to reconcile the two portraits, the loyal friend and drinking companion, and the calculating Soviet master spy. In interviews long after the war, his voice still carried a tremor of bewildered betrayal. "I loved him like a brother," he would say, the words hollow with decades of confusion. But the most profound and chilling silence emanated from Moscow. For 20 years, Stalin enforced a total blackout. Sorge's name was erased. His GRU handlers, men like General Alexander Korotkov, who had run him from afar, dared not speak of their greatest asset. To do so was to invite a one-way trip to the Lubyanka basement. This silence is the most telling part of the story. Stalin's Russia was a system built on the myth of the leader's infallibility. Acknowledging Sorge meant acknowledging two devastating truths. First, that Stalin had been given and had ignored the precise date of the Nazi invasion. Second, that the salvation of Moscow depended not on the leader's genius but on the work of a spy he had dismissed. This was a narrative Stalin could not, and would not, permit to exist. Sorge had to be disappeared twice, first from life, then from history. When Nikita Khrushchev finally authorized Sorge's rehabilitation in 1964, it was a calculated political act. It was part of Khrushchev's de-Stalinization campaign, a way to highlight the mistakes and crimes of his predecessor. The hero of the Soviet Union title bestowed upon Sorge was not just an honor, it was a weapon aimed at Stalin's ghost. Overnight, Sorge became a symbol of the loyal patriots whom the paranoid tyrant had wasted. The Soviet biography that emerged was sanitized, focusing on his brilliance, and sacrifice while downplaying his hard-drinking, womanizing, and the grim reality that his own masters had left him to die. This official Soviet version has heavily influenced the historical debate. Some historians, particularly in the West, scrutinize the claim that Sorge saved Moscow. They argue that while his intelligence on Japan was critical, Stalin had other sources, including his own brilliant cryptanalysts who had broken Japanese diplomatic codes, a project known as Venona. The decision to move the Siberian divisions, they contend, was likely based on a mosaic of intelligence, of which Sorge was just one vivid piece. The savior narrative, they suggest, is a romantic oversimplification born of Soviet propaganda. Yet, the counterargument is compelling. The Venona decrypts, though invaluable, dealt with Japanese diplomatic messages, not the raw, high-level military and political deliberations that Ozaki provided. Sorge didn't just intercept messages, he interpreted intent from inside the room where it was formed. General Georgy Zhukov, who commanded the defense of Moscow, stated unequivocally after the war that Sorge's information about Japan was the foundation for the decision to reinforce the Western Front. The weight of evidence suggests that while Sorge may not have been the sole source, he was the decisive one. His report provided the certainty needed for Stalin to gamble the entire far eastern flank. The moral questions surrounding Sorge are just as fraught. Was he a hero? A traitor? The answer depends entirely on the flag you fly. To the Soviets, he was the ultimate patriot. To the Germans, a vile betrayer. To the Japanese, a defiler of their trust and sovereignty. Sorge himself would have rejected these nationalist frameworks. He saw himself as a soldier in an international class war, serving an ideology that transcended borders. His loyalty was to the Comintern, to the idea of world revolution. This makes him a uniquely modern and terrifying figure, the perfect ideological agent for whom traditional notions of allegiance were meaningless. He betrayed everyone who trusted him personally, OTT, his many lovers, his drinking companions, for an abstract cause. This cold, ideological purity is perhaps the most unsettling aspect of his character. And what of the unsolved mysteries? The gaps in the record are tantalizing. Did Sorge have a final, undiscovered source? Why did he not flee when the net was clearly closing? Some suggest he had been ordered to stay in place, to become a martyr for the cause. Others believe his own arrogance and alcoholism clouded his judgment. There are persistent, unconfirmed rumors that in his final years in prison, he was contacted by American intelligence officers as the war ended, offering to trade his knowledge for his life, a deal the Japanese authorities reportedly refused. We will likely never know. His ghost haunts the craft of espionage. Modern intelligence officers still study the Sorge ring as a textbook example of optimal spycraft. The single brilliant asset in place, Sorge, paired with the unmatched source deep within the target bureaucracy, Ozaki, supported by technical and logistical specialists, Clausen and Vucelic. It was a perfect sell. Yet, it also serves as a grim lesson in the expendability of agents. Sorge was a weapon, and once used, he was discarded by his masters without a second thought. In the high-stakes game of nations, even the most valuable pawn is still a pawn. Today, the house in Meguro is gone. Sugamo prison was demolished. The physical traces have vanished. But the story endures because it speaks to the fundamental anxieties of the modern age, the fear that nothing is as it seems, that the friend at the bar may be plotting your downfall, that the truths upon which nations base their fate are woven from shadows. Richard Sorge proved that one man, armed with nothing but nerve, intellect, and a cause, could bend the arc of history. He lived in the dark, between the lines of official history, and from that darkness, he changed the world. He also proved that such a life consumes everything in the end: friendship, love, safety, and finally, the self. The final unsettling image is not of the spy on the gallows, but of the man in his prime sitting in the ambassador's study laughing uproariously at a joke, clapping his friend OTT on the back, all while methodically, lovingly dismantling the man's world. The true espionage of Richard Sorge was not just against states, but against the very concept of truth. He didn't just steal secrets, he made a secret of his entire being, and in doing so, left us wondering if, in a world of mirrors, anyone's face is ever truly their own.